But we started today. We said that we want to talk about. We want to define key terms today for the course, and we are asking the question: what is Caribbean thought? How would you define Caribbean thought if you were asked to define Caribbean thought? And just so you know, Caribbean. Um, and the title of today, we're looking at beyond the myth, understanding the Caribbean, beyond the myths, and into the margin. So I'm asking, how would you define Caribbean? And how would you define Caribbean? And some of you asked, are you talking to people, sir? Are you talking to geography? I'm just asking you, what is the Caribbean? It's an open question, and you are entitled to answer it any way you'd like. I would like to hear how you answer the question. So what is the Caribbean? I know Jerome spoke earlier. Anybody else? Anybody else?
I spoke earlier too.
I think I would say Caribbean can be defined as the study of that is Caribbean thoughts to me.
The study of what?
Our tradition and our culture.
This okay. If you were to tell if somebody from somewhere wanted to know what the Caribbean is, do you think that would tell them what the Caribbean is? Oh.
Caribbean thought.
No, but what is the Caribbean?
I'm recording.
No, I had told you you didn't respond to my answer.
What did okay?
I said it's a group of. I'd asked, do you mean what is the Caribbean like? What as it relates to the place or the people? I asked you that, and I'm not sure if you responded. I didn't hear, but then I proceeded to say it's a group of countries in mid America. It's surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. What else did it say? Sorry, I forgot my thoughts, because
but that's good enough. Somebody else. It's a big class. Let's take another.
Okay.
Anna, let me hear what you got.
I had mentioned that the Caribbean refers to a region which is located in the tropical zone, and it consists of the Caribbean Sea, the islands, and it is surrounded by the coastal regions. That's for the Caribbean.
What do you mean by it's surrounded by the coastal regions?
Sir, you're in a note.
What do you mean by it's surrounded by the coastal regions?
Sir, I'm not hearing you.
What do you
You're
mean
in and out.
What do you mean by it's surrounded by the coastal regions?
Oh, the coastal area would be that areas that are geographically close to the Caribbean Sea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Howard?
Sir, I'd define the Caribbean with one word. The Caribbean is an invention.
Well, did you read the text that I just sent?
What,
are you reading the paper?
No, sir.
Where you got that from?
By sitting here thinking about it, thinking about Caribbean thought, thinking
Wait,
about.
hold up. You've never heard the concept or the term that the Caribbean is an invention?
No, sir.
Have you ever watched any of my class? Have you ever talked to
Sorry, I've said it in the class already more than one time.
I was in Caribbean theology with you, sir. So
oh, okay. Howard, why didn't you tell me this is the Howard?
Yeah, but
yes, sir, that's hard.
But while I was sitting down here, I'm thinking about it, sir. Really thinking about it, and I'm thinking about how did we become what we are, and I'm saying, but this is really an invented space by white people. So, yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting. It's an invented space by white people. I would want to know. I would want you to push that to its logical end.
By the way, I'm gonna tell us something like go.
Yes, because first of all, people would take it to task and no, that's not true. Does everybody here believe what Howard says is true? That the Caribbean is an invention created by white people?
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
sir,
Uh-huh.
is it the space that was created or the concept of the Caribbean was created? Because if I'm looking at it, the land, the sea, all of what was there was actually created by God. But the concept of what the Caribbean is, these lush fields and all of that, that is what I would say was created by colonialism, but not
But
necessarily
we
the
couldn't be
space
talking
of
about the
it.
space because if we're going to talk about America, Africa, everywhere was created by God.
So that's
But
why I am going against the word the space. So it has to be something else. It cannot be the space.
but the Caribbean as we know it, right? Was created. We were brought from Africa to here. The persons who first lived there they were wiped out. They were pushed to the fringes. It was dominated by Europeans. So
And
that
I agree with
have
you,
been
Jerome, but just
no, this is
don't
not
call
very
it the
this is how
space, call it something else.
don't
When you
call
say wait, hold on. What do you mean by don't call it the space? What are you talking
Because
about?
when you say the space, you're looking at, for me, that is, you're looking at the geographical area. So I'm saying even before we were brought from Africa, that space was there. But what was created when we came here, that is something that we need to give that a name, but don't say the space.
But who is saying it's a space though?
Monica is saying then is that the idea of what the Caribbean supposed to be was when they thought, like you would have said, Howard, I think when they send us to the Caribbean, the black people for a reason. So I guess that's where she's probably trying to go to say that it's a give it another name because the space would have always been here. But then those white people probably would have been saying, hey, the Caribbean people gonna be this type of people. We're sending them down there for whatever reason and so forth. So is that
Okay.
what you're trying to say, Terika?
But even the name Caribbean was also invented and given to
Right. So it's I
the
agree with the fact that it's an invention, as I said, based, but is what should I put it now? Invention would be what they send them here for. So they invent the whole idea of the Caribbean people. This is what they are. When they go there, these are the people who maybe get punished. They're going down there. The persons who are going to be enslaved and continue to do this and so forth. So that's the invention for what they will make the Caribbean to be. Is that it?
It depends. You create. It depends. I wanted to see the perspective that you take. What perspective are you going to take? A defeatist perspective, or are
So
you
a
take?
defeatist perspective?
Are you
I'm
take
not
a
trying to defeat it. I'm
no?
just
Wait,
saying
no,
I'm
no, no.
agreeing.
Well, no. In general, what perspective do you take when someone asks of you who you are, or who you are as a people, as a person, as a Caribbean country, as people of African descent? How do you approach it? The whole idea of the Afrocentric paradigm speaks to that issue of do you start from a position of victory or a position of
I was
oppression?
going to say we are strong individuals. We are a proud set of persons who said we're hardworking people. If you were to ask me who am I, who are the Caribbean people, that's who I would see myself. We're proud people, we're strong people, we are hardworking. We're persons who know what it is to go through the storm and come out being strong.
Okay, very good, very good. And of course, the Caribbean reader, Ian Norman Gervin and Ian Meeks, in one of the books in your recommended reading, he says that the Caribbean is an invention, but he's going somewhere with that. when he says the Caribbean is an invention. And of course, he's not necessarily. And when Howard says that, I don't think he's talking about the the geography. But when people say that the Caribbean is a group of islands surrounded by the Caribbean Sea, they're pointing to geography. Um, of course, but the Caribbean is more than just its geography. But you can still talk about the issue of geography, because when we hear of Jamaica or the Caribbean, we think of beautiful islands of paradise with sun and sea and sand and reggae music and cannabis and Irish people like Usain Bolt and
But
people
that's
who are
an island.
people are living out their best dreams, desires, and life. But the problem is this very same lush Caribbean, the geography is not enjoyed by many people inside of the Caribbean. In fact, what is happening in the Caribbean, they're selling off the beaches, and if it's anything to be enjoyed, especially in places like Haiti and so on. It's or in some, or if you have money, the people with certain money who come from certain countries or certain places get to enjoy most of it and see most of the beauties and the lush, um, and so on. So that could be, maybe that is the perspective that Howard is taking. And so he begins by first saying it is an invention, a space, a created space, in the sense that its identity, its economics, yes, the social realities as well, yes, has been invented so that today the dependent capitalist position that we experience today, our attitudes towards African traditions and so on and so forth. Maybe that's the perspective that Howard is taking. However, I wanted to make a point what the Caribbean is not. The Caribbean is not, and that's very important. It is not merely a group of islands surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. I'm going to say that if I see that in an exam, or if I hear that within the halls of academia,
Why, sir?
that's a problem. The Caribbean. How many of you believe that the Caribbean is a group of islands surrounded by the Caribbean Sea?
That's what Google said.
That
The statement in and of itself is somewhat redundant.
wait, hold up.
Why is it redundant?
Wait,
It's
hold
Google.
on. Did you just say
Google-
Google just no wait, did you just tell me that Google said that?
Yeah.
So
Google
because
sees it.
as an academic who, and you live in the Caribbean, first of all, you don't need Google to tell you what the Caribbean is. Okay? You don't need Google to tell you what the Caribbean is. You don't need somebody outside or something created outside of the Caribbean to tell you what where you live is. And I'm saying, and by the way, I was marking an exam paper today and I was quite upset because students were saying, and in fact, 5 years ago when they evaluated this course, or 6 years ago, the University Council of Jamaica had a problem because students were saying what the Caribbean was not. And that is why I wanted to start with this today, so that you guys understand. And I want you guys to think about it, because I'm going to exclude places like Guyana, places like Belize and Suriname, and even parts of Central America. That's a problem. There are the Caribbean includes not just islands, but countries that are on the mainland of America. And you're telling me you guys are going to have an argument with me about that? Is Guyana surrounded by the Caribbean Sea? Or is it on the mainland of America?
Sir, I don't know how Guyana is a part of the Caribbean. I think they make a mistake right there.
The problem that people have is the problem of definition. If you start with a definition that is limited, you will come out, the result will be limited. So, and I said to you, that is what has happened with slavery, with why they were able to successfully enslave a whole set of people, because they start with a definition of a people. And that is what colonization is. Colonization is the dehumanization of people. It is stripping away people of their human. That is what power is. It is redefining a thing for what it is not. You start with a definition. So if your definition is limited, then of course the outcome will be limited. So you have to be careful of that. Guyana is part of the Caribbean. It's not surrounded by the water, but it's part of the Caribbean, and they are much involved with Caribbean experience, and okay. So of course so that's part of the thing.
So, sir, my question: how did Guyana become a part of the Caribbean?
What
I,
what do you mean? How
I,
did Guyana has
yeah,
always been part of the Caribbean?
yes, I know, based from our learnings from primary school coming up. So I'm saying,
Yeah.
how do they come by that? And I don't see Guyana part of the Caribbean because Guyana is all the way in South America. I don't see where it is in the Caribbean.
Well, I mean, Guyana is part of that. First of all, the people from Guyana, like Walter Rodney, Walter Rodney, they were much West Indian. They're part of the West Indian. They're West Indian people, and they are part of the same and the part and the trans and they were the people that were part of the transatlantic. So they were part of the experience of what we call the Caribbean today. Okay, so and I think in some parts of these places they're bordered. They may not be surrounded, but they're bordered. But they're not islands. They're not necessarily islands, but they are considered part of the Caribbean because the Caribbean is not merely a group of islands surrounded by the sea, because it would, of course, we said that it would erase places like Guyana, Belize, and others. The Caribbean can be defined geographically, but it must also be understood historically, sociopolitically, and psychologically. Okay, so and a lot of the people that went, some of the people that went to Guyana, some of them went to Trinidad, some of them, and the experiences in the region. And the next thing you need to know is that the Caribbean is part of the Americas. The Caribbean is a part of the American region. The Caribbean is part of the American region. So in fact, so Jamaica, that's part of the American region. You have the American region, you have the European region, yes. So that's part of it too. So the offshoot, if you look at a map and you look at the mainland, there's always offshoot islands, keys, and so on. If you drop a pen, if you hold up a pen and it drops and there is a splatter, there is the main splat, and then there are always splatters all around it. Okay, so the Caribbean island is really splatters that comes offshoot that comes from the mainland, but it's part of the Caribbean. It's part of the American experience. It's part of the Americas. In fact, when people talk about the New World, they're not just talking about the Caribbean, but they're talking about the America as a region itself, the American region.
Hello, sir, gone again.
You guys weren't hearing me?
Yes, sir, I'm hearing you
Yes, sir.
clearly.
Hearing it
Loud
clearly.
and clear.
Right. So when we're talking about the American region. So it's very important to know that as well. But so it must be also understood historically, sociopolitically, and even
So,
psychologically.
sir,
Uh-huh.
also, we have to understand that the term Caribbean did not come around because of um, the Africans coming here, or it was what the European came here and saw when they saw the Indians, the Caribs, the Arawaks, the Taínos, right? It was from out of that the name was birthed. Jamaica had those group of people. Guyana had those group of people. So in this region in the Americas, as you rightfully said, it was dominated by these people, the Indians.
How we sure about that? What are the evidence?
The evidence of what?
To show that these people used to live in the Caribbean before the Europeans.
I mean, of course, there's Arawak. Read Arawak to Africans, and that is. I mean, there is no doubt that that the Taino people live here. And if you go to Hellshire, you see remnants and markings of the Taino people, and these people. And later on you'll see a video talking about they came before Columbus, how the African sailors came here to the Caribbean before the Europeans. And in fact, many of the people who live here Many of them intermingled. Many of the Africans had a relationship with the Taino and the Caribs and so on. And many of them form part of the society here. That is why some of the artifacts look almost like African, look African as well. Okay. But they were here. So that's not the bone of contention, because there are books and we have done Caribbean studies. This class what we will contend with, though, is the fact that Christopher Columbus didn't do a discovery. We agree with that. He didn't discover anything. Because people, and in fact, Christopher Columbus may not have even landed in the Caribbean at all. He was only on the edges of the Caribbean. And okay, we will talk. You will hear that today, late in the last hour of the lecture, because I'll play a 1 hour lecture by Ivan Van Septima, who wrote the book "They Came Before Columbus: Historical and Literary Artifacts of Presence of Sailors of the African presence in the Caribbean before the Europeans." But that's very important to note. Social scientists ask not just what a society is, but in whose interest that society was created. In whose interest that society was created. Often the creators act in the interest of a class, a people, or a foreign colonial power. Again, social scientists are when social scientists study a society, they ask in whose interest is the society created, or for whom? Because often societies are created in the interest of the dominant class, yes, or a foreign colonial power. Look at what's happening in South Africa today. Look at what has happened with Egypt. Look what has happened in the Caribbean today. But so therefore you want to study the society. When you study society, you ask the question in whose interests. Ian Meeks and Norman Gervin argue that the Caribbean is an invention. And of course, we ask the question, is that true? Is it true that the Caribbean is an invention of the 21st of the 20th century? And I say to you, if before the Europeans made contact, would the Caribbean be what it is today? Probably that's one of the ways that could maybe help us to think, or to distill, to think about the question. Again, Ian Meeks and Norman Gervin asked the question in the Caribbean Reader. In the Caribbean Reader, the Caribbean is an invention, and the question is that true? Yes, I say to you. Perhaps an invention shaped through European eyes, molded by colonial hands, ever since 1492. Ever since 1492, when Columbus arrived and claimed what was not his. Yes? Do you agree with that? And secondly, economically, we know the Caribbean is often described as a dependent capitalist economy. As dependent capitalist economies, the Caribbean is defined as dependent capitalist economies. We know that. Yes? Now, and by dependent, we're talking about they are vulnerable and always in need of external or foreign aid or foreign investment. And when they get that foreign aid and foreign investment, the way how it is distributed through a capitalistic regime, through the dominant class. A dominant class system. A system crafted to be like through policy, neoliberal globalization, or what we call the Washington Consensus. Yes. Go ahead. Somebody has a Lornette, what you think?
Kwame said the last thing about in some like foreign investment, nothing else.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I said that we economically, we know the Caribbean is often described as a dependent capitalist economy. And by that, by dependent capitalist economy, I'm talking about reliant on foreign debt, foreign aid, foreign investment, external investment, and foreign aid. And capitalistic in the sense that once the investment arrives in the Caribbean, the way how it is distributed through a dominant class system, a system crafted to be so through policies we call through neoliberal globalization policies, or via the Washington Consensus. Now, last week we mentioned the Washington Consensus, what it is and what it may not be. But when we talk about the Washington Consensus, it is the idea or an agreement that if certain countries, if developing countries were to plug themselves in the market, plug themselves in globalization, plug themselves in the ways how plug themselves in a system that says if you liberalize your economy and allow for penetration, well, the word is not penetration, allow for globalization, allow for trade, allow for goods and services to cross borders. Globalization is where goods and services cross borders. If you liberalize your economy, if you deunionize, if you